Hi, everyone. Happy World Environment Day and welcome to this alumni seminar series. These series have been running for 4 years and they are a way to spotlight the different kinds of things that our students are doing once they leave the university. And it's also a way to kind of regenerate the conversations within university and see what are the ways to go forward on this. Given that it's Environment Day and given that we are in the restoration ecosystem decade, that is the UN decade of ecosystem restoration, which is till 2030, we thought that ecosystem restoration would be a really nice spotlight to think about the different ways that restoration is being spoken about in this country, and maybe to kind of also highlight the more social and political questions about restoration. Now, in India, or some of you who know, I hope all of you have some context of restoration, but it is very, very new. It is something that is starting up as a policy question, certainly. But once it goes to the field, we realize that it's much more than planting trees, right? It really comes to understanding the different landscapes, the different ecosystems, the different people, and then really working around those questions to build programs that address multiple needs, not just needs that are specific to carbon or specific to pollution or specific to reforestation. So I think this seminar really is an attempt to open out the question of restoration, move it out of the sphere of only scientific restoration. Everyone we're talking today comes from our social actors, political actors, restoration and trying to understand it through many different lenses. So I think what we're going to set out for you here today is first understanding the different organizations and contexts that our three alumni work in, and also to open it up from the point of policy. So, what are the larger questions and arrangements of policy that actually aid or challenge restoration? And then, when you go onto the ground, which is the next level, is to really look at gender and caste and how those intersect with questions of restoration. Now, I think that this is quite a new conversation in India. Certainly, the angles of caste and gender are pretty new in the context of restoration in India. So I think what we're excited about in this webinar is really to kind of showcase the different ways that our alumni are dealing with these questions. And given that they are extremely emergent kind of questions, we hope that you will come out with takeaways and reflections that can help you in the field of restoration as well. So with that, I'm going to hand it over first to Gautam, who will be talking about policy and governance in the context of restoration. And I'm going to hand it over. So welcome, Gautam. Thank you all, our panelists, for being here. And over to you.
Thank you, Sunayana. Hi, everyone. Good evening. Um, I'm an alumnus of the MA Public Policy and Governance program. I passed out last year. And since then, I've been working at the Center for Policy Design at A3. It's a Ashoka Trust for Research in Ecology and the Environment in Bangalore. Um, I guess one of my, getting out of college, I guess I had an interest towards governance, and that kind of led me to A3. I wouldn't say it was necessarily a thematic focus on environment or conservation, but it was kind of an opportunity that came across. And what has been really interesting for me since then is kind of understanding really the governance context within environment. Maybe it doesn't really come across as much as, when we talk about rural development, etc. But communities and community governance structures do have a central role to play in environment policy as well as restoration, and that's something that I've been quite interested in, focused on at my role in A3, which is focused on community forest rights under the Forest Rights Act. So my work revolves mostly around policy research and some amount of policy advocacy on community forest rights in central India and Karnataka. Community forest rights, for those who may not be aware, has a specific meaning under the Forest Rights Act relating to the rights of forest-dependent communities to manage forests that they have traditionally used and managed. And Forest Rights Act enables communities to have these rights recognized and then kind of create an empowering framework within which they can manage forests by themselves with state support for both livelihood and conservation objectives. So today I'm going to primarily look at this topic from the perspective of forest governance, as Sunayana mentioned, and then kind of explore what are the linkages with restoration as it operates today, while drawing on a couple of examples to illustrate both the state's perspective of restoration as well as the community's perspective, and then kind of identify the gap that exists between those. Um, I want to kind of use two vignettes from a recent field experience in Chhattisgarh. The first one being a conversation with a state bureaucrat who's in charge of implementing community forest rights. And interestingly, I think he said that in every sphere we want to move forward. That's the idea of progress. But when it comes to forests, we want to move backwards in time. To 100 200 years back, and that's the kind of vision and idea of forests or forest management that many bureaucrats work with, and it is in fact quite ingrained in our policy frameworks as well. Right now, while that's an ambiguous statement, it does hold relevance to how restoration and forest management plays out on the ground. And I'll kind of get into that in some more depth later on. But the second kind of set of observations is from visits to some of the villages in Bastar, where communities are now trying to manage forests after having received these forest rights. And something that I felt, something that came across clearly, is that communities approach forest management or even forest rights primarily from the livelihood perspective, right? So it is really income that plays a central role in both the community's incentives and as well as actions on how forests are to be managed, right? And their priorities are often with respect to non-timber forest produce, kind of exploring market linkages for this produce, and quite interestingly, even something like ecotourism, which was being undertaken by one of the villages that I had visited at a small level, but using whatever resources that they have to really generate income and livelihoods from these rights and the forest that they now have, that they're now managing. Um, so to kind of go back to that bureaucrat statement, I want to just kind of flesh out two themes. The first is this idea of restoration itself, and the second is a community-state interface and the tensions or the gaps that exist. Uh, what I think the statement I earlier mentioned about forests, going back in time with respect to forests, illustrates is one that there isn't a clear goalpost or signpost with which bureaucrats and the government is currently working when it comes to something like restoration, right? It is this broad ambiguous idea of, okay, more greenery or greater healthier forests, etc., but there aren't really specific objectives or indicators that the government uses. And as Sunayana mentioned, it is an evolving field. It is quite early days, but not having those objectives or indicators actually counteracts many of these efforts, right? So one of the primary impacts or the a downside of this is that, at least when it comes to forest restoration, and this probably plays out in similar ways in other ecosystems, say water bodies or agricultural lands, etc., is that it kind of gets reduced into this very abstract or a very simplistic notion of growing more trees or having greater greenery, right? Without really understanding or laying out what objectives are we working towards. Now, forests can be managed or restored for biodiversity, for livelihoods, carbon, maybe, but the government currently does not work with any of those objectives. It is this broader, vaguer picture of, okay, let's increase green cover and maybe there'll be some co-benefits, and that kind of has multiple outcomes or impacts that really pushes us back, rather than forward with respect to restoration. One thing that I would like to kind of highlight is the impact that this idea of afforestation, large scale tree plantations, is having on lands outside forest areas, right? Or what is technically called open natural ecosystems. Now, not all lands are naturally forests, and there's a variety of ecosystem types that exist in a country like India. But this imperative to kind of increase forest cover, and what it kind of leads to is this uncritical notion of large scale plantations being implemented without really understanding the context in which it is being implemented. And this is both the ecological context as well as the social context, right? Ecologically speaking, there might be lands which are not suited for large tree plantations, with whether it is soil, water availability, etc. But those kind of considerations are yet to really flow into how government plans out these interventions. And with respect to the social context, it really misses out on what the land gets used for. The government again takes a simplistic view of, okay, there is land that is barren or degraded or unused, while there might be actual social or economic dependencies on it. Even if there are not people living on those lands, there might be people living off those lands, in, with respect to say grazing or collecting forest produce, etc. But those nuances are also largely kind of left out because of this broad, vague idea of increasing of forest restoration, right? And just kind of draw a contrast with something that the EU is now developing, known as the nature restoration law. With respect to forests, they have specifically identified indicators to guide interventions and to monitor interventions, using things like what is a bird count, or what is a bird diversity, what is the tree species diversity being used, does it contribute to connectivity between forests. So those are all indicators that will then help us identify or understand what is our goal, what are we working towards. But that context is kind of missing in what we currently what the government currently does. And one of the obvious impacts is a large failure rate, right? Because you're trying to grow lands, forests or trees on lands which are not ecologically suitable for it, you obviously have higher failure rate of these plantations. But perhaps more importantly, what it also misses out is the social context, right? So and it kind of acts in two ways, and that's the community state interface. So when the government, or when forest departments more specifically, want to kind of create these large tree plantations, and their incentives are largely driven by these macro indicators of forest cover, or the fact that there is a lot of funding available and now we need that to be used, or even this, I guess, this idea of restoration not just being done but also seen to be done, right? Quite a bit like justice maybe in that case. So they always kind of go for interventions that are more tangible, more visible, and that in this case translate into tree plantations. And because plantations usually require some kind of, at least the way it is practiced, for 2 3 years, you need protection from external interferences, etc. It often leads to access being excluded for communities from these lands. And there are we don't have a great deal of land, I guess, which are devoid of human access or human presence. And therefore, what it often leads to is this exclusion of communities from their own forms of livelihood, whether it's grazing in non-forest ecosystems or even forest ecosystems, collection of NTFP, etc. And that acts both ways. One, forest department itself loses essential support of communities, which it will need to sustain these interventions, or sustain these kind of tree plantations, because driven by their own incentives, they would usually go for fast growing species which might be exotic, which might not have livelihood benefits, etc. And therefore the communities have very little incentive to support these interventions. And on the other hand, communities are actively losing out on what they might have earlier used for other purposes, land that they might have actually used for other purposes. Um, and another issue with how forest restoration currently gets practiced, it relates to the idea of exclusion, is the decision making processes through which these interventions get made, right? Again, because these are largely top down interventions driven by goals of increasing forest cover, etc., there is very little space for communities to either participate or far less in terms of decision making. uh, there are multiple programs. One of the recent restoration-related interventions that the government has brought forward is something known as the green credit rules, which gives forest departments the unilateral right to demarcate lands for forest plantations in exchange for corporate money. But there is like no consideration of communities, or that these lands might have active dependencies, or might even be potential lands over which there are community forest right claims potentially. Uh, and so that's one end of the spectrum. But even where there is some kind of participation being included in the policy framework, say for example a campa, which thinks about multiple interventions like natural regeneration, plantations, etc., it's another thing that implementation is always skewed towards plantations, because again, this imperative to spend money, have visible outputs, etc. Even in those cases, the participation of communities rarely kind of extends beyond tokenism, right? So in Campa, what happens is what is known as the joint forest management communities are supposed to be consulted. Even where that consultation happens, the problem is that these committees are creations of the forest department itself, and therefore their composition, their responsibilities, etc., are all tailored in a manner that suits the forest department's purpose. what we also see is these kind of uh, structures, governance structures, being used to diminish more democratic structures or more democratic processes that are available, say under the Forest Rights Act, which contemplates Gram Sabhas, or which has Gram Sabhas formulated, through which communities themselves can, one, make claims, and after making claims, kind of decide on what management, how to manage these lands, etc., with support from a forest department or other departments. But kind of the top down push towards restoration now, because it's becoming more and more of a topic even for the governments. There is of course a lot of push and focus, but that is kind of coming in a top down manner without really accounting for or exploring what are alternative ways in which this can be done towards better outcomes. And that, I think, is one of the key issues with respect to which how restoration, even in its nascent form, how it kind of plays out on the ground. And I'm sure Jayanti and Manoj can add more layers to what I said about democratic processes. A Gram Sabha itself would have multiple issues which should be explored. But I guess the point is, even if there are overlaps between what the government wants in terms of restoration and what the communities would like to come out of restoration, the conversation seems to be happening from two ends without really having a conversation with each other. And I think that is the central question that probably needs to be kind of debated and discussed more, particularly focusing on the questions of what are the incentives and what are the objectives with which we are working towards this, who makes the decisions, and how are the outcomes being distributed, to kind of arrive at an idea of restoration that's both, socio-ecologically and socio-ecologically appropriate as well as equitable. Um, so yeah, I'll stop there. Thank you. You're on mute, Sunayana.
Thanks a lot, Gautam. Maybe just for the audience, I just want to pull in something that Gautam said and highlight it. It might be interesting from an ecological point of view. So thank you. That was really interesting. One of the things when the bureaucrat was the story of the bureaucrat that you told, which is about looking back on restoration, and the word restoration also implies going back to something, right? Going back to the forest. But what we often don't consider are two different things. One is the time scale of a forest is very different from a human time scale. So tree species, their lifespans, their communities are far more different than what how humans think about ecosystem restoration. So when we are really thinking about a piece of land, say to make it easy to understand, we are not just thinking about what has happened to the land, but we also have to think about what is going to happen to the land. Given that the what kind of species you're putting in the land, what kind of climate change impacts will happen on the land, and those are beyond our lifetime eras as well. So our focus today is on the social part, but I want you to guys to keep the backbone of the ecological truth at the back of our minds, right? In the sense that we are only one manifestation of that ecological truth. So how do we when you're complicating it with these questions of time periods and going forward rather than looking back, how then do we then think about all of these social layerings on top of that? I'm going to stop there so that Manoj and Jayanti can really get into the social layering of it. So maybe we can start with Manoj, who's going to be talking about caste and its interaction with restoration.
His voice is clear. Okay now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Uh, Thank you for inviting us here and seeing my colleagues. It's really happy for me. Like Gautam already told about the policy perspective, and it's really nice to hear some of the thoughts from him. When we see, I'm actually talking about the caste perspective, which related to the land restoration and how it intersects the different community aspects here. So I will be talking some of the historical context why we need to talk on that issues first, because what we are seeing today, it's not the same as earlier, so we need to go beyond that and think on that. So I'm talking on that, like if you see the context of common land, because Jayanti and We are both working in the same organization, which working on the issue of common land restoration perspective. So, when we see the social context in the land restoration format, uh, where we have to understand the historical marginalization of the people, those who are living in the rural parts of India. So there are some of the movement which goes very well. We have to understand that perspective also. Like there are some of the movement called Mahad Satyagraha or Mahad movement, which lead by the B.R. Ambedkar. Why I am talking this movement right now? We have to understand this thing also, because this is very related to the uh, context of the current era, where we see on the grounds what's going on. When we go back in the era of Ambedkar in 1927, where he talk about, where he lead that movement, Mahar Satyagraha, for the resources of the common water, where every person can drink that water, but it is not accessible to the all communities, although all people those are living there. So where after that movement the people can get that potable water access, it is very long struggle in that era. But right now the same case, where I am working in Rajasthan, one of the block of Rajsamand district, Devgarh block, where I am working. In my field area, there is one town called as a Ninjar town, where I see the atrocity last week, where the people coming from the scheduled caste community didn't get the common resources as a water tube well. He is trying to get some water, but the social background, some of the dominant caste didn't allow him to drink that water. So that's why I put this thing, Mahar Satyagraha, and this recent atrocities here, what happened in the Rajasthan. Apart from that, after Ambedkar also talks about the environmental division between the rural communities and the urban communities. Why he talks about? Because he said that when we see the resources as a common is not accessible for all. We have to understand, we are talking about the commons, we are talking about the ecological restoration, but we have to understand the concept of accessibility or the power decision making in that process. Whose those are community, those are getting in that, those are involving or not, or only they are following the rules or the whatever uh, the process they are only following. So we need to think on that aspects also. So, like after the movement of Ambedkar, there is also the one manifesto released by the Dalit Panther in 1972, where if you see that manifesto, there are the three demands. The first was a basic demand regarding food, shelter, and second one is land for landless, because in Maharashtra, if you see the community, scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, and OBC, some of the non-dominant OBC, those people don't have the land access. They don't have even the agricultural land, very less land. So during Ambedkar time, there is Dada Saheb Gaikwad who lead that movement for landless laborers to uh, to give some land to the landless. After Ambedkar, there is Dada Saheb Gaikwad who lead that movement, and after that, the same thing will be picked up by the Dalit Panthers and who put that thing into their manifesto, because these are the things are related to, because there is no land in the village apart from uh, who can use the Dalit community as a commons, because they they don't have agriculture land, they don't have their other land, so they can use that land. But if you not allowing them to as giving them that land, this is very injustice for them. So the idea of naturalization or the ecology or nature, it is very Brahmanical kind of ideology, or the idea of pro Brahmanic idea. We have to understand this thing also. There is one writer called Ratnakar who written, and Satvik Ghatak who written the very good paper on this also, where he talks about this idea of neo-Brahmanism and state bureaucracy as working as a neo-Brahmanic manner. So what they did, they actually talk about the ecological restoration, they actually talk about the lands, but they are not talking on the actual issues of the landless laborer or the people, those who are very less voices in the village. So when you read that paper, there is the idea they talks about that the particular community has the morality to hold or to protect the nature, while the other community don't have that kind of capacity or that kind of morality. So who decide what? We have to understand this thing also, because we are Jayanti, I am like us, many people coming from the APU and other institute are working in very very rural areas. So we see that thing on ground very practically. We are seeing this thing because what in 1927 or in 1920, how the structural casteism we are happening there, and now when we see are on the ground, it is the same thing. Not like it is very big developmental change and that kind of thing. So the notion of morality in the land restoration, it's very problematic in that sense, because where we are working, the kind of communities are there, they are not seeing SC, ST and non-dominant OBC community as a people, because they are seeing like we are working here for many long years, we are doing our work because we have that kind of morality, we are very curious people, we are what kind of God's messenger. So these are the very some kind of dynamics we have to talk on this, because this is the platform where I'm very happy that I'm talking on this, because no other platform can allow such a talks. That's why I'm talking this very ground realistic thing what we are seeing on ground. So these are the some kind of background we have to in our mind whenever we are talking about policy. We have to see who are framing what. These are our question. Why not we are seeing that question? Because every time if people are working in AC wala kamras, those who are very privileged from their childhood to their graduation, and they are framing for the policy for the ecological restoration in the villages, for whom? So these are the very what kind of very basic question we have to understand. So these are the some kind of basic and after that I'm talking about this actual some of the case studies what I learn from this my works experience. Like there is a one case study. There is one town called Kilezaria town located in Rajasthan where I am working. That town has a common land where one lady living for more than 5 to 6 years, like very what we can say 1,000 feet or 700 square feet. Like this is the thing where she is living, but the villager has the problem because she is not a native of that village, and villager took a large meeting, and all the village decided that we have to expel this lady from this place. And some of the organization, those who are working on the issue of land restoration, whatever ecological restoration and whatever the glorifying terms, they are supported the villagers that you are doing a very good job because you are securing the common land of the village. But the dynamic is not the same. We have to understand when we talk when people talk about that, the lady told the people that she has no land, she has no son, no daughter, she has no family. Where she go? She live there as a single mother or single parent, but people only expelled her because of her caste identity, because she is a nomadic tribe. And in Rajasthan, if you go and roam around that, there is the Kalbelia community. Kalbelia community belonging from the nomadic tribe. There are 32 nomadic tribe in Rajasthan. One of them called as a Kalbelia community. So people talk about that this lady come from the Kalbelia community, how she can live here, she is not a native, and they expelled her. But she is very very good and strong lady. She put back, she went to the police station, she went to the court with the some kind of support from the Dalit activists of Rajasthan. But where here we have to understand, this is a very small case study, very very small, but we have to understand which land we have to secure, for whom we are securing, for what kind of. I am not like talking about that key. We don't need that key. We need a common land. We need a good common land where we can secure it for our futures. But if we can goes into the dynamics of caste and the social hierarchy which we are working in that area or in that specific location, then it could be the better solution from the kind of we can amalgamation between the two things, like the policy perspective and the what is the community needs in that specific area. These are the things. So in the common land there is always the issue of encroachment. Many organizations claim that we secure these things, we secure that land, how many acres and all that things. But you are not telling the actual questions. How many people are you supporting? The rural community, those don't have land. Renke Commission told about that nomadic tribes in India don't have the pakka house. 98% nomadic tribe in India don't have the pakka house. They are living in very jhopdi kind of thing, where they travel from 2 days here, 7 days there, 15 days there. So we need to understand these are the things also. This is a very basic things, but I don't think so. Through the policy perspective, through the bureaucracy, through the civil society or the academician, those who are writing the very good research paper. But these kind of things I never see. That's why I'm talking. These are the things. So these are some of the things from my side. Uh, I think I did from my side. If any questions, this is the welcome for you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Manoj. I think you've done a really nice job of kind of layering on Gautam's assertion on access, right? And I think the one thing that you highlighted that I would want people to reflect on as well are the different kinds of moralities that indeed, when we're thinking of restoration, and you're thinking UN, you're thinking national, you're thinking state, then community, and then within community, you kind of break open community, and there is a lot of stuff even there. And the problem with restoration always are these different kind of incentives and the different kinds of objectives that people have with restoration. Middle class actors often have the objective which is forest health, right? Other actors might have more anthropocentric questions, like what is human health that is connected with forest health. Some people might ask what is state health that is connected with forest. So the way that you enter the question will also kind of open up the complexities of access through that question. So, thanks, Manoj. I think you did a nice job of opening up that black box and being like, okay, if we go into the community level from a caste perspective, what really are we thinking about in terms of access? What are we thinking about when we say common lands? Who do common lands usually belong to? Right? They're not common to everyone, perhaps. So, and then you complicate it further with thinking about nomadic tribes and tribal communities and their own relationships with nature and their own moralities around nature, which may be completely different from a state led or a middle class actor or an international actor. So I just wanted to highlight that. And now moving on to Jayanti, who will bring us the gender perspective.
Hi. I graduated recently in 2023, and I studied public policy and governance from Azim Premji. After leaving the university, I joined FES, Foundation for Ecological Security, and my first posting, where I'm still posted, is in the district of Udaipur. And there's a small block called Gogunda, which is 35 kilometers away from the main city, and it's almost the Aravali, the foothills of Aravali, where I work. So let's talk about the landscape first. The landscape is majorly hilly, and the entire concept of commons. So my organization works on the concept of commons, which is a very theoretical concept for the people who are in environment. So there's an entire debate on the tragedy of commons and how people are often people who are sharing the commons, be it in the urban area or rural area, are always struggling to maintain and govern that particular commons. So Harden gave forward this theory, and Ostrom came up with certain solutions to cure this entire tragedy of commons. So I should first start off with just merely explaining as to what is commons, because this is a very let's say a very environmental concept. So commons is anything that is a collective shared by a community, a collective piece of land, a collective piece of water body, a collective piece of, in urban areas we can say parks, roads. So any particular thing which is shared by the community in general can be termed as commons, including the air. And for every different biodiversity, there is a different share of commons for the community. So my organization works in several states in India, and for Rajasthan, if the commons are pasture land, then for Madhya Pradesh, the commons are forests. Similarly, for a lot of coastal places in Andhra Pradesh and Karnataka, the commons are the water bodies like seas and rivers and lakes. So we work majorly towards restoring these commons and bringing back them to life from degradation. And this is what we've been working upon more or less since the late 90s. Now, since the topic is majorly involving the idea from, idea of notes from the field, I should first start off with my entire, the way I perceived women in, or like the other genders apart from men in this particular situation. So, and I would like to also talk about the difference between the de jure and the de facto rights that the women often get when it comes to land restoration. So, my first day of the field, and I was supposed to stay in this particular village for a good amount of 7 to 8 days. And I will also be taking in Gautam's and Manoj's idea. So, Gautam majorly on CFR and Manoj majorly on the caste issues, and I would be linking it with gender very actively. So, uh, first of all, whenever we talk about land restoration and commons, we can never ever exclude women out of it, because it is the truth that women are dependent on their commons majorly. So, specifically, when I talk about the rural areas, women are accessing forests, women are accessing pasture lands, women are accessing the water bodies on a daily basis. When I talk about forests, I talk about NTFPs that Gautam mentioned. When I talk about water bodies, I'm actively talking about the fisher women in Karnataka and the coastal areas and Andhra Pradesh who are actively depending on fishing. They are there on the ports. I'm talking about when I'm talking about pasture lands, I'm talking about the Adivasi women who are very the Adivasi women, the women who are into the entire dairy business, who are very much actively depending upon the grasslands and pasture lands to feed their livestock. So, perhaps more than any other person in the society, women are very dependent on their natural resources. Of course, another fact that adds up to it is the fact that they are living in these villages for the 365 days of the year. So men are often migrating to the cities, and men are often, changing jobs. But women are there living in these villages throughout 365 days, and they are still very much, not in connection with the main city to, give money and buy the resources. Therefore, they are very much active in terms of farming. They are very much active in terms of collection. So, my first day of field, and I go to this village called Brahmano ka Kalwana. So this is a very it's a very active thing in Rajasthan where all the villages are named after the community. So the villages are named like Brahmano ka Kalwana, Jhalo ka Kalwana, Rajputo ki Kameri, and uh, like very caste based, community based names for the villages. They have an entire history to it. So I spent a few days in Brahmanoka Kalwana, and I was living with a woman, an upper caste woman, in her household. She had a single. Her mother. She was a widow, and she is a widow, and she was the only daughter staying in the home. The other siblings were outside. So I was supposed to go to the pasture lands every to that particular pasture land every now and then. The pasture land, which is the village's pasture land, and I was supposed to go and I was supposed to look at the implementation. I was supposed to evaluate the implementation of two, three projects. So I was staying there, and I was looking at the daily life. Now, when I'm talking about the daily life, and when I'm talking about commons, I am also talking about the daily sort of routine that they indulge in when it comes to commons. So, of course, our mother wakes up at 4 a.m. in the morning. The first thing that she does is that she sources the milk from the cow, and then she drinks her tea, and then she lets her cow and buffaloes free, and she takes them to the pasture lands. Then they are staying there till like 4 p.m. in the evening, and then eventually between all of these between the time frame, let's say 10 a.m. to 4 p.m., her mother is going to the farm. She is sowing corn at that point of time, and then she's coming back. She's making her food, which is sourced from her farming activities, and then she's at 4 p.m. she's going again to the pasture land, and she's bringing back her livestock and cattle, and then she makes food, and then she sleeps. So that is her active dependency on her common. Now the time came to go to the pasture land and look at the intervention that the pasture land has received. So I go with her on foot, and we don't have any vehicle, and we are walking 4 kilometers. The villages, it's very important. Like being a geography student, it also very much entices me to see how is the entire architecture of the village in terms of where are the houses located, and how much is the distance from, let's say, the upper caste households and the lower caste households and the Adivasi households to the common land. that becomes a very, very major concern for me. Because let me tell you this, and it might come as a very big, I don't know if it's a very big surprise or not, but it was very interesting to me for sure. The upper caste households, where the upper caste women as well live, they are majorly the migrant families. So they are going back from Surat and Bombay, and they are coming back to their native households in the holidays. All households are majorly upper caste here. Similarly, somewhere in the middle are like the Banyas and, the, let's say, the Kshatriyas, the Rajputs. And towards the very end of the village are the tribal households and the Dalit households in the area, and the OBC households in the area. Now, when we start walking towards the pasture land is 4 kilometers from Santoshi's house, like the girl's house, which I was living in. So she's an upper caste woman. So the pasture land is 4 kilometers away from her house. And she's not even going to the pasture land every now and then. Of course, not her, her mother is. Now we started walking 4 kilometers into it. We are crossing every single kacha road, and there are stones and everything. And we finally reach our pasture lands. So the pasture land is healthy. It's completely restored. There are long grasses. It's completely secured with stones, and of course there are like small little, water structures for the livestock to have their water from. That is how like a pasture land looks like in Rajasthan. And of course they're on hilltops. So so now I was like, this all is very clear, and so where is the implementation of the other thing, of the livelihood thing? So she pointed at two homes situated on hilltops, and she's like, these are the two homes which have received the benefits of this particular project. So I climbed up the hilltop and I went to the home, and and there are like four small little children and two women in the home. They are Adivasi women, and they are living in the most dire circumstance, like in the most weird. I wouldn't even say poverty, because poverty is a very, it's a very like generalized word. They're living in the most like the most, let's say, like like the most like ignored place of the village. And when I'm asking them as to, why are you staying here, then the women are saying that, oh, we have to protect our common lands and our farms, and that is why we are situated here. And we could not get lands in our own village, in the village area, so that is why we are here. So my entire conclusion to this story is that, mm, whenever we are talking about the active connection of women and pasture lands and women and commons, we also have to look at the accessibility, as to how far is the woman going, as to how far is an upper caste woman going to access her pasture land, how far is a Rajput woman going to access the pasture land, which is, let's say, close to 4.5 kilometers, and how far is a tribal woman going to access that pasture land. Now, when I'm talking about livestocks, because livestocks is another thing that I talked about very actively, where women are engaged. If you look at an upper caste household, a woman is majorly taking care of, let's say, 4 to 5 buffaloes, or let's say max minimum to minimum 2 cows. And when I'm shifting my focus towards the Adivasi households, I'm seeing that the women are taking care of even the Gujjar households. So Rajasthan is known as the hub of dairy production. Uh, Apart from Amul in Gujarat, Saras exists in Rajasthan, which is like a dairy cooperative, and livestock and dairy are very active partners in Rajasthan. So livestock becomes another important part of pasture lands. So when I'm talking about Gujjar households, so there is a village called Palidana in Saira block, and majority of the people residing there are majorly Gujjars, who have, let's say, in one household they have at least close to 15 to 20 buffaloes in one house. And the women are supposed to go early in the morning and collect the hay, and they are supposed to feed them to the buffaloes. Now, when I'm talking about the architecture of the village, it's such that they have to travel, let's say, 2 kilometers more than any other upper caste women who are not even that much actively dependent on the pasture land, and are having a much more easier access to the pasture land compared to an Adivasi woman. So this becomes a very major issue when I talk about something like land restoration. Of course, we are doing very great jobs. We are constructing water harvesting structures. We are constructing trenches. We are constructing, um, you know, compost pits. We are constructing hard floors for livestock. We are constructing MPTs, mini percolation tanks. When we talk about restoration of the commons, but whenever we are actively talking about women and their dependence on the commons, we are often forgetting the accessibility and what how easy can we make it for them. Of course, there are very many high points to celebrate here. That like just like back in January, when Gautam was talking about CFR, we were able to grant at least 74 villages their CFR rights in the district of Udaipur, with the help of the state and the BDO and the local and the panchayats, and you know uh, encompassing the entire local governance arena. And similarly, we were also able to work with close to 40 women, elected women leaders, to make them much more aware about the pasture lands and what effect can it make on their livelihood. Similarly, there are a lot of celebrating points here, which I should definitely not ignore. But I just feel that when we talk about something like restoration, talking about gender becomes equally important, because, I often used to hear this one thing that, we talk about upper caste, Dalits, we talk about Adivasis, but it's in fact women in all the sections of these castes who are the most downtrodden. If we talk about a Brahmin man being the most privileged person in the Indian society today, we are also talking about a Dalit and an Adivasi woman being the most downtrodden. And surprisingly, when we talk about land restoration, an Adivasi and Dalit woman is very much dependent on their commons. So, Manoj talked about accessibility to water. I'm talking about our accessibility, the women's accessibility to the commons, to the pasture lands, and how much easy it is, which is not when we talk about it. So, that is where I was talking about the entire idea of de jure and de facto rights, and how many rights we have given them. We have given them CFR rights. We have given them CFR rights, so they have that particular right, but are we able to translate it into practice is one question. Are we, I was in Siliguri for like 2 months. I was working with A3 in Siliguri, and I was working on CFR only, and I was talking to women there because I was talking about biomass and their active dependency on NTFP collection in the Appalchand Forest Reserve. And they just say that we don't have ample time to go and convert the biomass into charcoal briquettes, and we are not willing to do this because we are very busy just walking 4 kilometers to collect the wood, which is very easy for certain women in the society. So certain women in the society have that accessibility of taking a bike, asking their man to like that, okay, let's go to the forest, we have to like collect wood, which is very like rare case, because they are very actively dependent on cylinders. In that particular case, they have that sort of income. But on the other hand, there are Adivasi and Dalit women who are walking 4 kilometers. They are facing the forest officials who are beating them up to because they are collecting the dry wood, and they are also facing the wrath of the elephants who are always crossing their path here and there. So when I talk about gender and when I talk about land restoration, that becomes my major issue of accessibility and the rights and the actual ground reality that we are talking about. So, yeah, this was my stance on gender and land restoration.
Thanks a lot, Jayanti, especially for that granularity that you got to that access question. We don't have much time. We have 5 minutes, so I'm opening up the floor for questions. Please go fast and ask your questions. Maybe I can start off with a question on access itself. Um, and I guess my question is that there are many intersections between gender and caste when we're thinking about access. What kind, and it's kind of linking to Gautam's question about objectives as well, right? What kind of design and objectives do you think needs to be changed in order to really think about these questions from a gender and caste perspective? And Gautam, you can also weigh in on this because it actually links up to the question that if for example the European Union has a kind of framework of what nature restoration looks like, obviously the context of gender and caste will be very specific in India. So what do you see also in terms of how that template should be adapted to India, or is it you can without thinking just take it and put it in the Indian context? So for Manoj and Jayanti, I want you guys to think about what objectives do you think that should be inbuilt into restoration that would help with this question of access for both gender and caste and other kinds of marginalities as well.
I'd like to answer that first, Sunil, because I think it's a kind of the specific question for me. I think it's a pretty direct answer, which is we can't really rely on that framework. I did lay out some indicators, but two things. One, I mentioned the indicators to give the idea that there can be objective metrics against which some of these things can be decided. But I think another thing that's important about the metrics that the EU had mentioned and I mentioned here, there's no real connection with livelihoods in any of those indicators. It talks about biodiversity, carbon, connectivity, and things like that, which I think reflects maybe their reality that forest dependence, livelihood forest dependence isn't really a big thing for them, which isn't the case here. So I don't think we can in any way rely on, use the metrics except for the fact that get the idea that we can design a framework within which some of these interventions or programs can be designed.
Jayanti and
I,
Manoj.
yeah, I think for me, when I talk about gender and accessibility, I see a probable solution only and only. I definitely cannot change the architecture of the village and the thoughts and notions of the people outrightly. It's a very slow process. So I definitely feel that one very good way to go about it would be, roping in the panchayats and the village institutions which are specifically catering to the pasture lands. So there are Charaga Vikas Samitis in every village, which have at least, we are trying that there is at least one women representative as a part of the Charaga Vikas Samiti, be it Adivasi or be it any Dalit or any Rajput women. And, they are having an active say in, uh, in terms of formulation of the bylaws. So there are bylaws which govern the pasture land, and I feel that designing very strong bylaws can be a very good method to provide equal access, and also looking at the governance of the pasture land and also in terms of restoration. I feel that if there's a very strong rule regarding that one household can collect only this much of grass, and otherwise there would be a particular fine. I think that can be a very nice solution to this particular question.
Manoj, you want to add to that?
Yeah, like from my side, if you say that we need to empower our older system called as a panchayat, whatever panchayati raj system. If we can empower them in more, what we can say that like in the form of bylaws, in the form of capacity building, then I think so. Rather than, because most of the communities are not have that kind of much faith in the government system. So we need to build that thinking in the community. Then I think so we can make a little bit difference in that process. So I think that we need to more empower, we need to more capacity. It could be good.
Okay, thanks a lot. We're out of time. I just want to say one thing because it kind of something is that plays on my mind, especially around CFR and things, is we often either we go into the ecological part of it or we go into the social part of it, and they both have trade-offs. It's not that the link between community health and human health is so interlinked with ecosystem health, in the sense that, especially from a livelihoods perspective, humans want something from that ecosystem, and people will also argue that ecosystem has value on its own without human intervention, right? So what becomes and who makes those trade-offs? I guess I don't expect an answer because this is a ongoing question, needs a lot of research as well to understand how CFR actually interacts with forest health. Do these rights actually translate into good forest just for the forest parameters itself, or for pasture lands, or for common? Does it actually, if we give more access to people, does that mean more degradation of that land? If we keep livelihood as the perspective, does it mean the choices of the vegetation that we put on that land is going to have future ecological impacts of that land? So there's no answer that I expect, and I'll be out of time. So I'll close this, but I just, in case you guys have any responses to it, we can take like one line and then close this session. But I just want to thank all of you, our presenters, of course. Thank you. That was amazing to hear your notes from the field and get a sense of what you guys have been working on. And for our audience as well, thank you for tuning in. And we hope that you'll kind of take away some things about restoration from this that you can implement in your own restoration kind of activities. Thank you.
Thank you.